Jose Raul Capablanca and Frank James Marshall. Of course, you already know who Frank James Marshall is. I showed the game, The American Beauty, on my channel. But I wanted to show you guys a game today. It was played in 1918 in New York. Uh, of course, back in those days, every tournament was strong and every tournament was famous. But this is played in 1918, like I said, and it was uh, I believe it was a double round robin with 6 players. Or no, a 2 round robin with 6 players because one of the players was sick. And this is the first time that anyone has ever seen the Marshall attack. And Jose Raul Capablanca, with his incredible skills, I mean, he was world champion for a reason. He refutes the Marshall attack over the board. But let's go ahead and see this game. Starts out with e4, e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, bishop b5. This is the Roy Lopez. We have a6, the Morphy defense, bishop to a4, knight to f6, castles, bishop to e7, rook to e1, b5, bishop to b3, castles, and c3. Now, nowadays, if you don't feel like playing or allowing the Marshall Gambit, you don't play c3. You either play a4 or h3, possibly. But like I said, this is the first time that anyone has ever seen this over the board. So he plays c3, which is a normal move in the Roy Lopez. We have d5. This signifies the Marshall Gambit, and I believe it was in um no, it wasn't this position. But we have e takes on d5, knight takes on d5, knight takes on e5, of course, knight takes on e5, rook takes on e5, and knight to f6. And I believe it was actually this position that Jose Raul Capablanca thought for about an hour to refute the Marshall Gambit over the board. We have rook to e1. He doesn't want to allow the bishop to come to d6 with tempo, and he wants to try and get the move h3 and to try and stop the knight from coming to g4, seemingly. But we have bishop to d6, h3, and we have knight to g4. Now this is in Marshall's preparation. Now, even from the very beginning, he's already causing a lot of problems for Capablanca, and he is it acceptable to capture the knight? If you capture the knight, then you get queen to h4. Then you get he would have to play rook to e4, not allowing this bishop to capture the pawn on g4. We have queen to h2 check, king to f1, king to h1 with check, king to e2, bishop takes on g or queen takes on g2, and we have d3 because this rook was under fire from the queen, and we have bishop takes on g4, rook takes on g4, queen takes on g4, king to e1, and rook a to e8. And this is a lot better for black. So after this knight to g4, of course he didn't capture. He plays queen to f3. Now we have queen to h4. Now he's also causing even more problems for Capablanca. In this position, I believe he plays d4. But can you capture the knight? If you capture the knight now that the queen is already on f3, you get bishop to h2 with check. And you either have the option of going to h1 or g1. Let's go ahead and check out h1 first. We have king to h1 and bishop to f4 with check, which is a very important move because it's not allowing the king to ever reach the e3 square. Now, you either have the option of playing king to g1 or covering up. If you cover up with the queen, this loses instantly. The queen takes on f2, and he's attacking this undefended rook here. So you would have to play rook to d1 and rook to e8, and there's no defense against coming to e1. So instead of after this bishop to f4, he didn't. Of course, he didn't cover up. But the other option is to play king to g1. And if you play king to g1, then you get queen takes on queen to h2 with check, king to f1, and then queen to h1 with check, king to e2, rook to e8 with check, king to d3, rook takes on e1, queen takes on f4, queen to f1 with check, and then if you come to c2, then capturing the bishop is checkmate. So you would have to play king to d4, and of course that just looks silly. I mean, your king is on d4, but simply playing bishop to e6, stopping all ideas on the f7 pawn, and now it's really difficult to develop these pieces, but it's the only option that you have in order to at least play the game. So we have knight to a3, and bishop takes on b3, a takes on b3, rook takes on c1, rook takes on c1, and queen takes on c1. Now it's actually black who's up in material, and he's actually up the exchange. So uh, after this bishop to f4 with check, he didn't cover up, or actually, oh wait, no, sorry, what was it? Okay, yeah. After the bishop to h2 with check, if you play king to f1 rather than king to h1, then you get bishop takes on g4, and the queen would have to move, queen to e4, and then bishop to f4, which is a good move because you can't capture the bishop, of course, because queen to h1 is checkmate at 1, because the bishop is slicing all the way here, and he's stopping the king from escaping to e2. So you would have to play g3, then queen to h2, seemingly sacrificing the bishop, then g takes on f4, then bishop to h3. Now the only option that you have is to either come to e2 or to cover up the queen and lose the game. So you would have to play king to e2, and rook a to e8 pins the queen to the king, and you're winning this game. So after this queen to h4 move, of course he didn't capture the knight, and he played d4. We have knight takes on f2, and again he's causing even more problems for Capablanca. Can you capture this knight on f2? But let's go ahead and see it. If the queen captures on f2, then you get bishop to h2 with check. Now, most people would think that coming to g3 just wins the exchange, but you'd actually be losing this game, because if you play bishop to g3 first, instead of playing bishop to h2 with check first, if you play bishop to g3, like I said, then capturing the rook with the queen wins the game, because if you play king to h8, then capturing the rook is checkmate, or if you capture the queen with the rook, then rook to e8 will be checkmate and won, because the bishop would be pinning the rook to the king. So after so let's see what happens if you capture that knight. We have bishop to h2 with check, king to f1, bishop to g3. Now the idea of capturing on f7 doesn't work, because after the rook recaptures, it's coming with check because the king is on f1. So he would play queen to d2, bishop takes on h3, g takes on h3, queen takes on h3 with check, and then king g2 or queen g2 covering up. Then queen takes on g2, king takes on g2, and bishop takes on e1. Yeah, you have a knight and a bishop against a rook, but black is up 2 pawns, and it's considered better for white, but finding these moves over the board is very, very difficult. So he did not capture, after this knight takes on f2, he did not capture this knight with the queen. He played rook to e2, uh, getting out of the x-ray of the queen on the rook. So we have bishop to g4. H takes on g4 is what was played. But let's go ahead and see what happens if you capture this knight. If queen takes on f2, then you get bishop to g3, um, attacking the queen. Now you get queen to f1, bishop takes on e2, queen takes on e2, and rook a to e8, and this is completely over. There's no stopping the rook from coming to e1. Now if you cover up with bishop to e3, then you get queen to e4, and there's no stopping the queen from attacking it. You'd have to develop with like knight a3 or something, and then queen takes on e3, queen takes on e3, and rook takes on e3. So there's just no stopping it. So after this bishop to g4, he finds the proper refutation. He plays h takes on g4. He takes the bishop. We have bishop to h2 with check, and then king to f1, and we have bishop to g3. Now the idea is to come to h1 with checkmate. So you'd have to capture the knight on f2. We have queen to h1 with check, king e2, bishop to f2, or bishop captures on f2. And if you capture this this queen here, or the bishop, then queen takes on c1, and the threat is to come to e8 with check, and this would be completely deadly. So after bishop captures on f2, then if you play king captures on f2, then you get queen takes on c1, and this is actually a draw, because after the queen covers up, then the king will always be able to be checked by the queen on e3, f4, and h6. So queen to f4, and then wherever the king goes, he'll always be able to check on these three squares. So after this bishop to f2, or bishop takes on f2, he finds the best move, and he plays bishop to d2. Now he's covering the very important e1 square. Now, if, say, he brought the rook to e8 with check, and the king captures, then there's no coming to e1 with checkmate, because the bishop is now covering the e1 square. So we have bishop to h4. Now the threat was actually to cover to capture the bishop, because the e1 square was guarded by the bishop, like I said. So we have queen to h3, threatening to exchange queens. And of course, Marshall can't accept this. He is rook a to e8 with check, king d3, and queen to f1 with check, and king to c2. And we have bishop to f2. Now queen to f3, completely paralyzing that bishop, and queen g1, bishop to d5, c5, and the only option that Marshall has is to open up lines for his rook, so that's why he plays c5. We have d takes on c5, bishop takes on c5, and b4, attacking the bishop. So we have bishop to d6, a4, a5, a takes on b5, a takes on b4, and we have rook to a6, attacking this bishop. So we have b takes on c3, knight takes on c3, and bishop to b4. We have b6. Now, of course, Capablanca wants to start pushing his passed pawn, and it will prove to be very, very deadly. So we have bishop takes on c3, bishop takes on c3, and h6. He's creating some breathing room for his own king. So we have b7, and we have rook to e3, and after bishop takes on f7, everything loses for black. So in this position, Marshall actually resigned the game. But let's go ahead and see what happens, just so you know. If you play king to h8, then you get rook takes on h6, and this is checkmate because the pawn is now pinned by by the bishop. Now, after this bishop to f7 check, if you capture the bishop um, with the rook, then you get b8 with queen, and king to h7, and rook takes on h6. If you play g takes, then queen to f7 is checkmate. So if you play um, king takes on h6, then you get queen to h8 with check, king g5, and queen to h5 with checkmate. Um, so it's a complete killer. Now after this bishop takes on f7, the only other option that you have is to play king to h7. Let's go ahead and see it. Then queen f5 with check and g6, and then queen takes on g6 with checkmate. So it's a complete. This is a very instructive game. It's incredible because Marshall saved his Marshall attack for almost 8 years. To he didn't never show it to anybody. He didn't use it against anybody. He wanted to find a worthy opponent, and who none other than José Raul Capablanca to spring it on him. But I do want to show you guys something really quick. In the beginning of the game, after he plays c3, instead of playing this c3 move, say you played h3 instead, the idea of coming to g4 with the knight doesn't really work anymore, because after d5, he takes, and then we get to the same position before. And after d4, this is a very important move because the bishop can come to d2, and like in the move in the game, and it's not really working for black. So we have bishop to d6, attacking the rook, of course, and then rook e1, and then knight g4 doesn't work, because after queen to f3, of course, queen to h4, and then white actually has the option of going rook to e8. Now after queen takes on f2, queen takes on f2, uh, knight takes on f2, then you would have to capture on f8 with check, then the king or the bishop would take on f8, and then king takes on f2. Now white is up a piece, and he's actually winning this game. But let's go ahead and go to the very um, let's go to the last move of the game. Let's adjust the board here. Sorry about that. But the last move that was played is bishop to f7 with check, and Marshall resigned. So this is an incredible game. To use all of that preparation, Capablanca had to have seen everything up into that bishop to d2 move, even after uh, Marshall played knight to g4. He had to have seen almost everything. So it's incredible that it just goes to show that Capablanca was an incredible player, and he was world champion for a reason. But I hope you guys enjoyed that game, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you.